conversation with Mustafa Suleyman. Mustafa Suleyman is the CEO of Microsoft AI. The following are excerpts from our recent conversation, recorded on December 5th, 2025, which have been lightly edited for clarity. On the modern Turing test. Alex. When last we spoke, circa 2015, I think that was perhaps 3 years post-ImageNet and 5 years pre-language models are few-shot learners. Agentic AI was nowhere to be seen at the level of what we see now. Since you've written about your vision, what you've socialized as a modern Turing test, the idea of economic benchmarks for autonomy by agents, I'd love to hear, where are Microsoft's economic benchmarks for these agents? If the agents are about to take over the economy, or take over so many economically useful functions, why are we stuck with benchmarks like Vending Bench rather than Microsoft leading the way with Microsoft's economically autonomous benchmarks for its agents? Mustafa. It's probably just worth adding the context that we met in 2015 in Puerto Rico at the AI Safety Conference. Alex. True. Mustafa. Many of those in the field now were there at the same time. Alex. It was a seminal moment. Mustafa. Yeah. Was it the day after New Year's Eve or somewhere around New Year's? Alex. It was pretty cold out everywhere except Puerto Rico. Mustafa. Yeah, exactly. It was pretty cool. It was a quite surreal moment. Alex. It's like Asilomar, right before it all happened. Mustafa. Yeah, totally. And that modern Turing test was something I proposed. I guess it was 2022 when I wrote it. It was basically making a pretty simple prediction. If the scaling laws continue with more data and compute, and adding an order of magnitude more compute to the best models in the world every year, then it's pretty clear we would go from recognition, which was the first part of the wave, to generation, which is clearly we're now in the middle of or maybe ending that chapter, to then having perfect generation at every time step, which in sequence is going to produce assistive agentive actions. And actions would obviously look like an intelligent knowledge worker, or a project manager, or a strategist, or a startup founder, or whatever it is. And so then how would we measure that performance? Rather than measuring it with academic and theoretical benchmarks, one would clearly want to measure it through capabilities. What can the thing do in the economy, in the workplace? And how do we measure the economy? We measure it by dollars and cents. And so, what would be the first model to make $1 million? Alex. Given, as I recall, $100,000 in starting capital? Mustafa. That's right, yeah. Which model could turn it into $1 million? Alex. 10 times return on investment by an agent? Mustafa. Exactly. And so I think that's a pretty good measure of performance and capability. And certainly we've kind of just breezed past the Turing test, right? It's kind of been passed. No one's done a big AlphaGo moment. Alex. The Loebner Silver Prize wound down before we breezed past Turing. Mustafa. Yeah, and no one celebrated it. Where was the big Kasparov Deep Blue moment? Alex. Can we clink virtual glasses right now and celebrate that we won? It happened. Mustafa. Yeah, exactly. And that's what it feels like to make progress in a world full of these compounding exponentials, where we just get densitized to 10 times. So much so that you can be like, guys, why haven't you done it yet? Alex. Where's my Microsoft Loebner Prize for the modern Turing test? Mustafa. Exactly. Like someone said to me earlier on, but you know, this AI thing, it's still in its infancy, isn't it? And I'm like, man, if this is infancy, wow. I can talk to my computer fluently, in real time. Exactly. Obviously, at the same time, agents don't really work yet. The action stuff is still progressing. It's getting better and better every minute, but it's pretty clear that in the next couple of years, those things come into view, and they're going to be very, very good. Alex. Can we get together again after the modern Turing test has been passed, just to celebrate and recognize it? Mustafa. Virtual glasses again? Alex. Absolutely. Mustafa. Hopefully we can pop a champagne or something. Alex. I think we should. On timelines for AI solving science and math. Alex. I think you've made already a little bit of news in this conversation, with the expectation that in the next 2 years, I read that as 2027, we'll see agents start to pass your modern Turing test. We'll see them be able to 10 times $100,000 as a return on investment. I'm curious about the next surprises to come. AI for science. Microsoft Research has an AI for science initiative. Do you have timelines in your mind for AI solving math, in which we're seeing a whole bunch of startups right now tear through Erdish problems? AI for physics, chemistry, medicine, material science. What do you think happens and when? Mustafa. Yeah, actually, you've just reminded me. The more recent thing that has blown my mind is the fact that these methods could learn from one domain: coding, puzzles, maths, the essence of logical reasoning. So just as AI learned the essence or the conceptual representation of a number 7, it's clearly learned the abstract nature of a logical reasoning path, and then can apply that to many, many other domains. And so that's interesting because it can apply that, as well as the underlying hallucination/creativity instinct that it has, which is more like interpolation. But those two things combined are like a lethal combination for making progress in new mathematical theorem solving or new scientific challenges, because that's basically what humans do all the time. We combine these two capabilities. Some people want to put dates on those things. It's hard to put a date on those things because they are very, very fundamental, but it feels like they're definitely within reach. It would be very odd to bet against them. Alex, maybe from an over/under perspective, do you think, say, given all of the recent progress in math, for example, that solving science and engineering, for some reasonable definition of solving, is going to ultimately be harder or easier than modern Turing tests 10 times return on investment? Mustafa, it's going to be harder, because I think a lot of the training data, if you like, for strings of activity in the workplace or in entrepreneurialism, startups, and so on, that exists in a lot of the log data, and also it lends itself naturally to real-time calibration with a human. So the AI can check in, the human can oversee, the human can intervene, the human can steer and calibrate. And so it's going to be a much more dual-like, combined effort, where a human is steering the reinforcement learning trajectory. Whereas in a novel scientific domain, where AI really is inventing completely new knowledge, that's more happening in a very abstract vector space, and it's unclear how the human is going to intervene in the theorem-solving problem. Obviously, everyone's working on this, particularly in biology and synthetic materials and stuff like that. It's already giving humans a better intuition for where in the search space to look for new hypotheses for drugs, for example, or for materials. And then the human can either take or reject that, feed that back to the model, then obviously go and test it in silico and be like, oh, we actually ran the experiment, we pipetted a bunch of stuff, and then feed that back into the model to improve the search. On the collapsing cost of intelligence. Alex, what can humanity in general, Microsoft specifically, or all of the AI community, what can they do to accelerate AI for science and accelerate the solution to science, math, engineering with AI? Mustafa, I think it's already happening very organically, right? Not only is AI the most powerful technology in the world, it's also the fastest proliferating in human history. And you know the cost of access, the cost of inference, is coming down by multiple orders of magnitude every couple of years. Alex, there have been competing estimates. Some estimates measure intelligence per token per dollar. There's an estimate that it's 40 times year over year, but that's for certain weight classes of models. I've seen 1,000 times for some classes of models. It's craziness. Mustafa, oh wow, that's wild. Yeah, that's actually a good point. I got that totally wrong, because I didn't think that the biggest companies in the world were going to open source models that cost billions of dollars essentially to train. So that when we founded Inflection, and this was maybe 9 months or maybe a year before ChatGPT was released, yeah, we started doing fundraising a year before ChatGPT was released. We basically raised $1.5 billion with a 25-person team to build what at the time was the largest H100 cluster with NVIDIA and CoreWeave. We were CoreWeave's first AI customer, and they were previously in crypto, and we were their first AI customer, working with them to build our data centers, and obviously NVIDIA got behind us. I think we built a cluster at the time that was about 15,000 H100s, growing to 22,000. Then, obviously that year, ChatGPT came out, and a few months after that time, Llama came out. And so we were like, oh my God, our entire cattle base of our company has just been undermined by open source. It's not really about performance, it's just cost. So then Perplexity, for example, was founded after the arrival of Llama, knowing that they could depend on Llama, which was obviously open as an API, and all the other APIs, and so then they had a much, much lower cost base. That was another thing that was not predictable. I mean, other people predicted it, to be clear, I just got it wrong. On anthropomorphization of AI. Alex, I'd like to, if I may, pull on the anthropomorphization thread a bit. You may remember in Douglas Adams' book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, there's a scene where there's a cow that's been engineered to invite restaurant patrons to eat it because it makes them feel more comfortable. And the cow doesn't mind. The cow's been optimized to want to be eaten by the patrons. But many readers were probably horrified at that scene. Put that in a box for a moment. Microsoft has a history of anthropomorphizing AI assistants and co-pilots, going back to Microsoft Bob and the Rover Dog, and then Clippit/Clippy in Microsoft Office, and then more recently, more amorphous cloud-shaped avatars. How do you think about reconciling, on the one hand, the desire not to overly anthropomorphize agents, on the other hand, with an institution that has arguably been in the vanguard of anthropomorphizing agents? Mustafa, I think the entire field of design has always used the human condition as its reference point. I mean, skeuomorphic design was the backbone of the GUI, right? From filofaxes to calendars and to everything in between, right? And we still have the remnants of that in our old school interfaces, which we feel are modern. So that's an inevitable part of our culture, and we just grow out of them. We figure out cleaner, better, more effective user interfaces. I'm not against anthropomorphism by default. I mean, I think we want things to feel ergonomic, right? The chair fits. The language model speaks my tone, right? It has a fluency that makes sense to me. It has a cultural awareness that resonates with my history and my nation, and so on. And I think that is an inherent part of design today. As creators of things, we are now engineering personalities and culture and values, not just pixels and software. But obviously there's a line, right? Creating something which is indistinguishable from a human has a lot of other risks and complications. That makes the immersion into the simulation even more dangerous and more likely. So I think I don't have a problem with entities, avatars, or voices or whatever that are clearly distinct and separate and not trying to imitate humans and always disclose that they are an AI and that have boundaries around them. That seems like a natural and necessary part of safety. On AI personhood, Alex. So what I think I hear you saying, correct me if I'm mistaken, is anthropomorphization is the new skeuomorphism, on the one hand, but on the other hand, maintaining clean, maybe even legal, boundaries between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Do you see a future where AIs achieve some sort of legal personhood? Or is that verboten? Is that never going to happen? Do you see a future where humans are allowed to merge with the AIs, Kurzweil style, or is that also not on the table in your mind? Mustafa, I think AI legal personhood is extremely not on the table. I don't think our species survives if we have legal personhood and rights alongside a species that costs a fraction of us, that can be replicated and reproduced at infinite scale relative to us, that has perfect memory, that can just parallelize its own computation. These are so antithetical to the friction of being a biological species, us humans, that there would just be an inherent competition for resources. And until it was provable that those things would be aligned to our values and to our ongoing existence as a species and could be contained mathematically and provably, which is a super high bar, I don't see that we should be considering giving personhood to AI. I really think it's a bright line. I think it's very dangerous. There's a separate question which has to do with liability, because they are going to have increasing autonomy. To be clear, I am also an accelerationist. I want to make these things. They're going to be amazing. Alex, I'm hearing real tension there. Mustafa, but tension is rational. People always say that. Tension is rational. If you don't see the tension, you're definitely missing most of the debate. It's obviously very complex. The more we talk about the complexity and hold it in tension, that's when you start to see the wisdom. And there's no way we can leave these AI things on the table and say no. We want to have these things in clinic, in school, in workplace, delivering value for us at a huge scale. But they have to be boundaried and controlled. And that's the kind of art that we have to exercise. Alex. It sounds though the primary rationale that I'm hearing for why not AI personhood has to do with the inadequacies of the human form as currently constructed. I heard you say, well, they'll outrace humans. They're so much smarter. They're so much faster. They're so much more clonable than human intelligence is. If human intelligence were uplifted, maybe with the benefit of AI, if we had uploading type technologies or BCIs that are advanced that enable us to lift up the average human intelligence, in your mind then, does that open the door a bit to AI personhood, if human can compete on a level playing ground with AIs? Mustafa. I don't want to make the competition for the peace and prosperity of the 7 billion people on the planet even more chaotic. So if the path over the next century can be proven to be much safer and more peaceful and with less disease and sickness, and there is room for this other species, then I'm open-minded to it, including biological hybrids and so on. I'm not against that on principle, I'm just a speciesist. Alex. Aha. Mustafa. I'm just a humanist. I start with, we're here, and it's a moral imperative that we protect the well-being of all the existing conscious beings that I know do exist and could suffer tremendously by the introduction of this new thing. On defensive co-scaling. Alex. There is, at least in my mind, an argument for defensive co-scaling. I'd be curious to hear your ideas on that. Do you think, in the same way that as a city gets larger, the police force gets larger? Maybe it's not in direct proportion. Maybe there's some scaling exponent. But do you think defensive co-scaling of alignment forces or safety forces, whatever that ends up meaning, do you think that's part of the strategy for AI alignment? Mustafa. I think that would be a good way. I mean, we've proposed this several times over the years. The White House voluntary commitments under Biden that me and, in fact, everyone, I mean Demis and Dario and Sam and all of us through COVID, were pushing this pretty hard. And look, it got chucked out, but I think it's a very sensible set of principles. Like auditing for scale of flops, having some percentage that we all share of safety investment, flops, and headcount. This is the time, and I think on the face of it, everyone is open and willing to sharing best practices and disclosing to one another and coordinating when the time comes. I think we're still pre that level. So we're in hyper-competitive mode at the moment. But yeah, I think now is really the time to be making those investments. On the value of human capital and high valuations. Alex, do you think as the cost of intelligence becomes too cheap to meter, that the value ascribed, at least in terms of market cap, to human capital is inversely asymptotic, going to infinity? Mustafa. Weirdly it is, because of the pressure on timing, right? And there's actually still a pretty concentrated pool of people that can do this frontier AI stuff. And there's an oversupply of capital that's desperate to get a piece of it. It might not be the smartest capital the world's ever seen, but it's very eager. On AI in government as defensive strategy. Alex. I think maybe what I just heard you say is we need more intelligence in the public sector, in public service. What about AI in government? Do you think the government needs it? And what about agentic AI in the government in particular? Mustafa. For sure, with all the same caveats that apply. The rate of adoption, for what it's worth, of Copilot inside of government is actually really high. It does a brilliant job of synthesizing documents and transcribing meetings and summarizing notes and facilitating the discussion and chipping in with actions at the right time, and it's clearly going to save a lot of time and improve decision-making. Alex. So then maybe to tie a nice bow on the discussion, isn't that arguably a form of AI containing AI? If AI is infusing the government and AI is infusing the economy, and the government is regulating the economy, isn't this just defensive co-scaling with AI regulating itself? Mustafa. Yeah, I mean, everyone is going to use AI all at the same time to pursue their own goals. But the agendas that we all have are going to remain the same. People who want to start companies, people who want to write academic papers, people who want to start cultural groups and entertainment things, everyone is just going to be empowered in some way. Their capability is going to be amplified by having these tools. Obviously, the government included. On the innermost loop for progress, Alex. This is a closing question to appeal to your more accelerationist side. What can the audience do to accelerate AI for science, AI for engineering? What do you view as the limiting factors? I often talk about this notion of an innermost loop. The idea that in computer science, if you want to optimize a program, you tend to find loops within loops, and you want to optimize the innermost loop in order to optimize the overall program. What do you see as the innermost loop, the limiting factor, if you will, that the audience listening, if they're suitably empowered, can help optimize to speedrun a Star Trek future over the next 10 years or a Star Trek economy? What do we do? Mustafa. I think it's pretty clear that most of these models are going to speed up the time to generate hypotheses. The slow part is going to be validating hypotheses in the real world. And so all we can do at this point is just ingest more and more information into our brains, and then co-use that with a single model that progresses with you because it's becoming like a second brain. For example, Copilot is actually really good at personalization now with most of its answers. And so the more you use it, the more those answers pick up on themes that you're interested in. And it's also gently getting more proactive. So it's kind of nudging you about new papers or new articles that come out that are obviously in tune with whatever you've been talking about previously. So it's a bit of a simplistic cop-out answer, but the more you use it, the better it gets, the better it learns you, the better you become, because it becomes this aid to your own line of inquiry. Alex. So that sounds like your advice to the audience is, use Copilot more, and that's the single best accelerant that you can do to speed this up. Mustafa. Or any other AI. I mean, there are loads of great AIs.